What would you do if the child you raised, fed, loved, and sacrificed everything for looked you in the eye and demanded $200,000 or else? Not asked, not pleaded, demanded. This is the story of one parent who didn't argue, didn't beg, and didn't stay. They sold the house, packed a bag, and drove straight into the mountains, and they never once looked back. There is a moment in every parent's life when they realize the child they raised has become someone they no longer recognize. It does not happen overnight. It creeps in slowly, through small requests that become bigger demands, through a tone that shifts from grateful to entitled, through eyes that look at you and see not a parent, but a resource. This story begins in a modest home, lived in for over 2 decades, filled with memories, mortgage payments, and a love that was never supposed to have a price tag. The parent in this story, we will call her Margaret, was 63 years old when the demand arrived. She had spent 4 decades working, saving, and building a life that was quiet but full. She raised her son alone after her husband passed. She skipped vacations so he could go to college. She worked extra shifts so he would never feel the weight of poverty she had known as a child. She believed, as most parents do, that love like that is returned. She was about to learn otherwise. Her son, Daniel, was 34. He had always been ambitious, which Margaret had encouraged. But ambition, without discipline, has a way of curdling into something dangerous. Daniel had started what he called a company, a vague business idea involving an app, a brand, and a vision he could describe beautifully but never quite execute. He had already borrowed money 3 times from his mother, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Each time he promised repayment, each time the promise quietly dissolved like sugar in warm water. Then came the evening that changed everything. Daniel arrived at Margaret's home unannounced, sat down at her kitchen table, and slid a printed document across to her. It was a funding request, formal, formatted, even numbered with sections. He had titled it Investment Proposal, Family Round. The amount listed at the top of the page, in bold, was $200,000. Margaret read it 3 times. She looked up at her son. He was not nervous. He was not apologetic. He was waiting, as though the answer was obvious. Margaret asked him where she was supposed to find $200,000. Daniel's answer was immediate. "Sell the house," he said. The house she had lived in for 22 years. The house where she had nursed him through fevers and celebrated his graduations. The house she had planned to retire in. He explained it like a business transaction, clean, logical, emotionally detached. The house had equity. The equity was sitting unused. His business needed capital. To Daniel, the math was simple. To Margaret, the math was devastating. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She told him she needed time to think. Daniel nodded, picked up the document, and left. Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time after that. She did not cry immediately. She just sat, listening to the house around her, the familiar creak of the floorboard near the window, the hum of the refrigerator, the silence that had always felt peaceful, and now felt like a question she did not know how to answer. To understand how a son could make such a demand of his mother, you have to go back further. Daniel was not born entitled. He was born into love, and that love, over time, became the problem. Margaret had never said no to him easily. When he failed his first year of college, she paid for him to retake the year. When his first relationship ended and he sank into depression, she moved him back home for 8 months. Every fall, she caught him. Every stumble, she cushioned. Without meaning to, she had taught him that she always would. The first loan was $3,000. Daniel needed it to cover rent while he built his first app. Margaret gave it without hesitation. The second was $8,000. Startup equipment, he said. She transferred it the same day he asked. The third was $15,000 for what he described as a critical business partnership. She took it from her retirement savings. Each time, Daniel spoke in the confident language of someone on the edge of success. Each time, Margaret believed him, because believing him was easier than doubting him. Friends had noticed. Margaret's closest friend, a woman named Carol, had gently raised concerns twice over the past 3 years. She had used careful words, words like boundaries and patterns. But Margaret had always defended Daniel. He was finding his way, she said. He was ambitious. Starting a business is hard. Carol had nodded and said nothing more, because that is what kind friends do. But privately, Carol had watched a capable, strong woman slowly hollow herself out in service of a son who was learning he never had to grow up. Daniel's company had no employees, no clients, and no revenue. It had a logo, a sleek one, and a pitch deck that looked impressive on screen. He had spent months perfecting the presentation. He attended networking events. He spoke the language of entrepreneurship fluently. But behind the language was a pattern. He was building the appearance of a business without building the business itself. The $200,000, Margaret would later realize, was not seed funding. It was a way to continue living in the idea of success without the work of it. Margaret spent 3 weeks after that kitchen table meeting in a state of quiet paralysis. She went through the motions, made her meals, walked her dog, called Carol on Tuesdays. But inside, something had cracked. It was not just the money. It was the way he had asked. The document, the formal tone, the expectation. He had not come to her as a son comes to a mother in need. He had come as a businessman comes to an investor, detached, transactional, certain of the outcome before the conversation had even started. It was during week 3 that Margaret did something she had never done before. She sat down and wrote out, on paper, everything she had given Daniel over the years, not to count it against him, but to see it clearly for the first time. The loans, the unpaid rent, the tuition retakes, the groceries she had quietly bought when he was between projects. The total, when she added it up, was already close to $70,000, and none of it had ever been repaid, not even a conversation about repaying it. Margaret called Daniel after 3 weeks of silence. She told him she would not be giving him $200,000. She told him she loved him, that she believed in him, and that this was her answer. Daniel's response lasted 40 minutes. He raised his voice. He reminded her of everything he had been through. He told her she was the only person who could help him. He told her she was letting him fail on purpose. He told her that a real mother would do this. Those words, a real mother, landed like something physical. After she hung up, Margaret sat in silence for a long time. Then she did something unexpected. She opened her laptop and searched mountain cabins for sale under $100,000. She did not know exactly why she did it. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the first flicker of something she had not felt in years, the idea that her life did not have to look the way it currently looked, that there were other options, that selling the house did not have to mean giving the money to Daniel. The idea grew slowly, the way important ideas do. She started saving listings. She started reading about people who had left their former lives behind, not in crisis, but in clarity. She found stories online of people in their 60s who had simplified, downsized, and discovered that the life they had been maintaining was costing them far more than money. It was costing them peace. She began to understand that the house, the home she had defended so fiercely in her mind, had quietly become a cage she had built around herself. She told Carol. Carol, to Margaret's surprise, did not try to talk her out of it. Carol asked one question: is this running away from something or running towards something? Margaret thought about it for 3 days. Then she called Carol back and said, "Both, and I think that's okay." She had spent 63 years making decisions based on what other people needed from her. This was the first decision she could remember making entirely for herself. The feeling was unfamiliar. It felt, she said, like breathing after holding her breath for decades. She listed the house on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she had 3 offers. The house sold in 9 days, above asking price, and the moment the sale closed, Margaret felt something she had not anticipated. Relief so strong it was almost grief. Relief that she had done it. Grief for the version of herself that had waited so long to do it.
She called Daniel and left a voicemail. She told him the house had sold. She told him she loved him. She told him she would be in touch once she was settled. Daniel called back within the hour. He was certain the money was coming to him now. He began talking about timelines, about wire transfers, about what the business would look like in 18 months. Margaret let him finish. Then she said quietly and clearly that the money was not for him. It was for her. She had found a cabin. She was moving to the mountains. Daniel went silent for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, "You're serious." She said, "I am. I love you. Goodbye for now." And she hung up.
The cabin was small. That was the first thing Margaret noticed when she arrived. How small it was, and how that smallness felt like freedom rather than limitation. One bedroom, a wood-burning stove, a porch that faced a ridge of pine trees that turned different colors depending on the light and the time of day. She had not owned anything this simple since before her son was born. She unpacked in 2 hours. She made tea. She sat on the porch and watched the light move across the trees and did not speak to anyone. She had expected loneliness. She had braced herself for it. The silence, the distance from everything familiar, the absence of the routines that had structured her life for decades. But loneliness did not come. What came instead was something she struggled to name at first. Stillness. Not the heavy stillness of waiting, but the light stillness of someone who has finally stopped running an errand that was never theirs to run. She slept deeply for the first time in years. She woke up and felt, without drama, that the day was hers. She began hiking. Gently at first, short trails near the cabin, 15 minutes out and 15 minutes back, then longer. She discovered a trail that led to a clearing with a view so wide it made her feel both very small and very capable at the same time. She started carrying a notebook, not to plan anything, just to write down what she noticed. The way frost looked on bark, the sound a creek made in different seasons. She had never had time to notice things like this before. Now she had nothing but time. Daniel sent messages. At first, they were angry, accusatory, full of words like selfish and abandonment and unbelievable. Margaret read them. She did not respond immediately. She had learned, slowly and painfully, that responding to anger with urgency only feeds the anger. She waited until his messages changed tone, and after about 6 weeks, they did. The anger gave way to something more honest, confusion. "I don't understand why you did this," he wrote. That message she answered, calmly, carefully, with love that no longer looked like sacrifice. She wrote to Daniel over several emails, long ones, the kind that take days to compose. She told him the truth, that she had been enabling him, not helping him, that there is a difference between a safety net and a hammock, that she had confused the two for years, and that the confusion had not served either of them. She told him she loved him in a way that was no longer willing to harm itself. She did not ask him to respond in any particular way. She simply told him the truth. Something unexpected happened in the months that followed. Daniel, stripped of the safety net he had leaned on his entire adult life, began to change. Not dramatically, not in a movie-style transformation, but slowly, in the way real change actually works. He got a job. A real one, with a salary and responsibilities. He stopped working on the app for a while. He started paying off a small credit card debt. He called his mother, not to ask for anything, but just to talk. Those calls, Margaret later said, were the best gift she had ever received. Margaret has now lived in the mountains for 2 years. The cabin has a garden, small, impractical, but alive. She grows tomatoes and herbs and one spectacular rose bush that she did not plant and cannot explain. She has made friends with 2 neighbors she sees once a week at a local market. She reads more than she has in 40 years. She is not wealthy. She is not traveling the world. She is, by every quiet measure she knows how to use, deeply and unexpectedly happy. Not despite what happened, because of it. What Margaret's story reveals is something that many people feel, but few are willing to say, that love, taken to its extreme, can become a form of self-erasure.
When we remove every consequence from the lives of the people we love, we do not protect them. We protect them from the very experiences that would help them grow. A parent who absorbs every impact shields their child not from difficulty, but from development. Margaret did not stop loving Daniel when she moved to the mountains. She simply changed the form that love took. Psychologists who study family dynamics have a term for what Margaret had become, the designated rescuer. It is a role that is accepted gradually, almost invisibly, through years of small choices made with genuine love. The rescuer steps in so often that the person being rescued stops developing the internal muscles needed to rescue themselves. Breaking that pattern is not an act of rejection. It is, paradoxically, one of the deepest acts of love available, because it says, "I believe you are capable of more than you are currently doing with your life." There is a question that sits at the center of this story, one that many parents, siblings, friends, and partners will recognize. At what point does helping become harming? There is no universal answer, but there are signs. When your help is expected rather than appreciated. When saying no feels more dangerous than saying yes. When another person's stability depends entirely on your continued sacrifice. When you have stopped asking what you need and started believing your needs do not count. These are not signs of love working well. These are signs of love becoming imbalanced. Margaret says she does not regret any of the years she spent caring for Daniel. She regrets only that she waited so long to care for herself with the same dedication. She wishes someone had told her earlier that self-preservation is not selfishness, that a parent who loses themselves entirely in service of a child produces not a grateful child, but a child who has never learned to live without that service. She is telling her story now, carefully, without bitterness, because she believes someone listening needs to hear it. The mountains did not solve everything. Daniel is still finding his way. Their relationship is still being rebuilt, slowly, honestly, conversation by conversation. But something true has been established between them now that was never there before, a dynamic built on reality rather than rescue. Margaret lights her wood stove every evening and watches the fire catch. She has learned that she cannot build a fire by throwing herself into it. You have to stand outside it, tend it carefully, give it air. That is what love, done well, actually looks like.